The Anime Award goes to My Hero Academia final season.
Hold on, didn't y'all hate this show like 2 years ago? My Hero Academia is probably one of the most controversial new-gen anime we've had in a while. We lived in a world where it once wasn't even socially acceptable to admit you were a fan of this show without straight up just getting bullied. Shunned from anime society, if you will. But all of a sudden, the final season airs and it gets praise, recognition, and people praising it like they were writing for it the whole time, and it makes history. Getting above a 9 out of 10 rating on every episode of its final season, and gaining accolades like Anime of the Year like it's nothing? What the hell happened? Why are people all of a sudden tuned in after giving it crap all those years ago? Why are we praising Deku when we were literally calling him one of the worst main characters of all time because he quote cries all the time just a few years ago? Is it just a result of a good anime adaptation, or maybe something more? Hi, my name is Mimikyu, and as a newer gen manga reader whose favorite anime is unironically My Hero Academia, I'm here to investigate why this once polarizing series became the biggest subject of praise following its final season. And by the end of this video, I'll hopefully be able to tell you why liking My Hero Academia became socially acceptable again. So without further ado, let's get active. To understand this, we must of course first talk about where it all began. For all intents and purposes, I won't be going that deep into the story itself because we're looking more at how the public reception of the show has changed, but it is important to look at least some elements of the story because they do play a role in how people see the show. My Hero Academia originally debuted in the Shonen Jump magazine in July of 2014, but the actual anime wouldn't premiere until April of 2016. The general reception of season 1 was actually pretty solid for the most part, mostly because people like the setup of this classic underdog story where Izuku was gonna take it all. And I must admit that it was pretty nice seeing Deku getting his leg back against Bakugo. 100% deserved. But the show itself wouldn't blow up until early 2017 when season 2 dropped, with the sports festival arc being the primary catalyst to this. I don't think it's an over-exaggeration to say that, for many, this arc was probably their first introduction to My Hero Academia, including myself. And I mean, season 2 did have a lot working in its favor. The character introductions were amazing, the notorious introduction of the hellish Todoroki family storyline, and Bones delivering a masterpiece in Deku vs. Shoto were the overall factors that ultimately would pull in thousands if not millions of new fans and get them to tune in. The sports festival arc definitely started conversations. As we moved on to season 3, the series continued its peak, with the first big climax in the Kamino arc being the first real turning point in the story, as All Might used the last embers of One for All and were left to believe that, in his words, Deku was next, and shit was about to get serious. It was his turn now, and that was the moment when the series started feeling like it was stepping into something bigger. Overall, seasons 1 to 3 are what I consider to be the show's peak because they excelled at setting the foundation and expectations for what was to come in the series. We got introduced to a ton of interesting characters and their personal motivations, and Deku developing his own fighting style, Bakugo Loki starting his redemption arc, Todoroki learning to deal with his identity, and much more things that probably isn't suited for this video, but could definitely be expanded on in Asa's Act 1 My Hero Academia retrospective video, which you should definitely check out after watching this. But overall, it was just good setup and a great way to set the stakes for what was to come next in the series. Also, culturally speaking, My Hero Academia was on a generational run from 2016 to 2018. It became the ultimate gateway anime of its generation because it filled the massive void left by Naruto's conclusion in 2017. By crossing over into Western comic book culture, it managed to break through to the mainstream internet fandom, effectively flooding anime conventions with cosplayers and spiking in manga sales. At this point, the show was even sweeping industry awards just on the merit of season 2 alone, with its iconic opening soundtrack Peace Sign by Kenshi Yonezu peaking at number 1 on both Billboard Japan Hot 100 and the Billboard Japan Hot Animation charts. Needless to say, this was easily one of the most positive and promising eras for a brand new anime. Surely nothing could go wrong, right?
This is my Todoroki.
Right? The chaos. Where should I even begin? Now, to be fair, My Hero Academia was never perfect, as there were minor complaints that were pretty mundane even early on during the show, whether it was about Deku being a crybaby or Todoroki being a bootleg Zuko, though this one I'm more forgiving of, to be honest. But it's normal. All stories in media have flaws to them, and that didn't stop people from getting invested into the series. But the first time public perception around My Hero Academia truly began to crack was right here. Ironically, especially when it was still blowing up between 2018 and 2020. And this is where all the discourse surrounding the lovely community of My Hero Academia comes in. I'm sure you've heard and seen all the wonderful things this community has done for Kohei Horikoshi and his beloved manga. Such a sweet and innocent community. Yeah, screw you, buddy. Who is falling for that? Now, I won't be going extensively into the fandom itself, because I'm sure you've probably heard the same song and dance around it over a million times. But I do think this is something important to at least go over, because I truly think that this is the point where the discourse around the show started to morph into something a lot more negative. Specifically when notorious behavior from My Hero fans we all love and enjoy exploded on the internet across TikTok and Twitter. Let me explain. The transition of My Hero Academia's perception particularly occurred in two waves. The first wave hit during the summer of 2018, when the surge in My Hero Academia's popularity, aka season 2 and 3, brought in a massive wave of younger and chronically online fans. I personally remember starting My Hero Academia when I was like 15, but a lot of people recall being way younger when they first started. And understandably, at these ages, people tend to get very hormonal. As a result, a massive wave of extremely aggressive shipping wars broke out, and fans that were particularly fond of male ex-male parents like Baku Deku began just viciously harassing anyone who preferred canon pairings. Now, I don't even know how these shipping wars even started, but if I'm honest, people were active in this bitch. Like, you'd straight up get death threats if you weren't pro Baku Deku. God, I cannot believe I'm even saying this. But as a result, the My Hero Academia fandom started getting a reputation for being loud, aggressive, and weirdly hostile, and genuine fans or casual viewers began dropping the show because they didn't want to be associated with the fan base, which honestly was completely understandable. This only got amplified in 2020 when the COVID-19 lockdowns caused TikTok usage to skyrocket, thus creating a specific subset of the My Hero Academia fanbase to go viral for all the wrong reasons. Cringe roleplay, bizarre cosplay trends, and aggressive public behavior that turned into content for everyone else to laugh at. So now My Hero Academia wasn't just popular, it was mocked, the butt of every joke in anime. And thus the show went from being the quote darling of modern shonen to a highly debated and criticized series. Now this shift is crucial because the fandom's terrible reputation would begin to rub off on the show's mainstream power, slowing down its growth by overshadowing the actual story. And while season 4, well at least the first half, was still highly praised, mainly because of the main fight being Deku versus Overhaul, for the first time, this wave of cringe was arguably outtrending the anime itself, and it shifted the public's eyes off of the show and onto the obnoxious fan behavior. This fandom truly drove a massive wedge between any potential viewers and the show because they didn't want any association with a community that the internet universally mocked, as you were now deemed a quote loser if you were a fan of My Hero Academia. Legitimate critiques or praise of Horikoshi's writing were completely upstaged by stupid shipping drama. It was clear the show was starting to resemble a circus, becoming polarizing to many for all the wrong reasons. And now that I'm done talking about this dumpster fire of a fan base, let's actually get into some of the criticisms. Thank God. Now, while the fandom was an obvious catalyst for the change in the perception of My Hero Academia, it wasn't the only reason people started tuning out. Remember the so-called generational run it was on from seasons 1 to 3? Well, let's take a look at the show and oh, it's not doing so great either. Okay, now this isn't meant to be a full-on comprehensive analysis of what was wrong with the plot of the show, but it was becoming clear that as the manga and anime progressed, longtime fans had started becoming more critical of the series, particularly having issues with several flaws of the show, which I'll point out for the sake of providing context into why the public started to switch up on the series. First, the act of handing Deku like several additional quirks so fast was definitely a choice. People argue that Deku almost instantly became overpowered without necessarily earning it, and it removed the whole underdog element to him that would try to figure out how to work out his power like he once was. This dramatically sped up the pacing of the story. Second of all, Horikoshi's massive cast, once widely being praised for being one of the most diverse supporting cast of characters, was now being criticized because Horikoshi literally did nothing with them. Well, almost none of them. Beyond Deku, Bakugo, Todoroki, and a splash of Ochako here and there, the majority of the class either felt like pawns or plot devices to move the story along. A lot of them just became background pieces instead of active players. I mean, seriously, can someone please tell me what the hell Momo Yaoyorozu has done since the events of the Kamino arc? Not with Class 1A, but by herself. What has she done to impact the plot in a meaningful way by herself post-Kamino? 2.0. Literally nothing. Hell, this could be felt when the Clash tried to go save Deku in the Vigilantes arc. I was literally cringing when I saw Jiro trying to grasp at straws in an effort to connect with Deku. And it was like, girl, y'all had like one interaction together. A lot of the Clash just stopped mattering as much. Third, Deku's morality itself became the center of criticism because people felt that he lacked any meaningful development beyond wanting to save mass murdering villains. I mean, he claimed to want to save Shigaraki, but we never actually see him come up with a plan. The Vestiges came up with one for him. There was also this aspect of mindless empathy that people really didn't like about him, particularly when he chose to forgive Aoyama without a second thought. You know, the UA traitor that almost got them killed multiple times. I don't know, he kind of just felt stuck. And it just felt like Deku wasn't someone who could think for himself anymore. Something he'd done so many times earlier during the series. And finally, of course, people were tired of the lack of stakes and consequences in the story. Seriously, like how many times can you count on your fingers that half of these characters should have been dead as hell? No, some of them should have been dead as hell. I mean, if we have characters like Gran Torino surviving getting pierced in the chest by people like Shigaraki, do we really think there are stakes for the final story? It completely removes all the tension. Now that we have a general consensus of the fandom's thoughts on what was starting to be the later parts of the show, it was clear that the general opinion was starting to morph either way, even without the ridiculousness of the fan base. And to be honest, even I believe that by all accounts, the criticisms were actually pretty valid, and this change in perception reflected a schism within the fan base, as a serious divide would start to take place. On one hand, you had fans that were still defending this series hard because they loved it so much. You were told that you wanted Horikoshi to work himself to oblivion to appease you. On the other hand, you had people that were genuinely frustrated because they felt like the series wasn't handling its cast, pacing, or tension as well as it used to. I think this was especially prevalent in the Dark Deku arc, as people either really liked or really hated it. This seriously went from a united fan base ready for this new era of shonen to one more divided than ever. This divide would worsen due to manga readers experiencing the decline of the story gradually, while anime onlys would get a massive and more direct drop in adaptation during season 5 of My Hero Academia. My Villain Academia should have been one of the biggest moments in the series, but instead, it got absolutely butchered in favor of the Class 1A versus Class 1B arc. Also in an effort to promote that World's Heroes Mission movie literally no one asked for, well, allegedly anyway, it was just a disaster. Manga readers were understandably furious at parts of the arc that would be cut, and they just couldn't experience it in its full glory. This also really messed up the pacing. Because of this rearrangement paired with the fact that the animation here was straight up just terrible, like Bones, seriously, what the hell is this? Resulted in the public not just being frustrated with Horikoshi's writing skills, but the adaptation as well. Needless to say, the decline of the series wasn't just a fandom problem. It was becoming a problem in the anime itself. Sure, some people still enjoyed it, but for many, they were done, and a massive part of mainstream audiences would drop the series after season 5. It was clear, people were unsubscribing and many were tuning out. Following the disappointment that was season 5, the series was left in a very hollow spot. Many people chose not to stick around, and MHA was down bad. Something had to change. And luckily for the series, it would reach somewhat of a turning point, as MHA would have a bit of a resurgence with season 6 airing a pretty decent adaptation of both the Paranormal Liberation War and Villain Hunt arc. And I mean this in the most literal sense here because the ratings for these episodes were the best they'd been in years. Seriously, like almost every single episode at least got an 8 out of 10 rating, so MHA was somewhat popping again. People especially loved the peak moment of the series being, of course, the Dobby's dance climax. It sits as one of the highest rated episodes of season 6 and for good reason. The build-up, the anticipation around it, and just the fact that it outtrended the freaking presidential elections was a big enough moment in the manga that allowed the series to bring back some of the fans through its adaptation. And honestly, I can't blame them. I mean, the war arc had us all in a chokehold speaking as a manga reader, so seeing it adapted made it like 10 times better and definitely helped start to turn the public perception back around. And I mean, it wasn't all perfect. That Shigaraki versus Deku face-off got the short end of the stick, and the blue skies in the war definitely made it harder to take it seriously, but holy crap was this season just better overall. And although the Vigilante arc was a mixed bag in terms of the discourse around it, rating-wise, it was some of the best we'd seen, period, as the latter half of the series would mostly range in 8 and 9 ratings. And I think the main reason for all of this this was because of the shift in the tone of the series. The story went from mostly lighthearted school festivals and corny stuff with Class 1A to a full-on war with heavier consequences and a much darker tone. People weren't just watching kids spar anymore. I mean, for hell's sake, Midnight died, which made people turn their heads and go, holy shit, they're not messing around anymore? The story was saying very clearly that things could actually go wrong now. This truly spiced the story up. I believe this resurgence truly started hype in the latter parts of the show as we continue into season 7, immediately gaining traction with the massive cinematic battle that was Star and Stripe versus Shigaraki. And I mean, holy crap, they were battling on jets in the middle of the sky. Like, how cool could it get? And I also think the almost conclusion of the hellish Todoroki family, as well as Bakugo's brutal death, especially piqued interest once more with the general public. And slowly, MHA had eyes on it again. Why? Because the stakes were raised. One of the main characters has died, the society has fallen. I still remember how this manga spread of Bakugo laying whole gaping from his chest had the fanbase in a chokehold. It was so beautifully executed in the anime, and his emotional quote-unquote departure really struck a chord within many. People had to tune in because something bad had finally happened. And as season 7 concluded with a quirkless All Might entering the battlefield, the season definitely left us all on a cliffhanger that culminated in hype for the 8th season being at an all-time high. You just had to see what would happen next. The final arc in the anime felt better than what people actually expected because it exceeded expectations of what the show could do. Its bold leap in actually having some of its main characters get seriously messed up, and elevation in overall animation in both season 6 and 7, don't even think about it, raised the stakes for MHA, and people started taking it seriously again. Now, it wasn't perfect by any means. Obviously, a lot more people should have died or been injured at the very least, but it at least tried to do that, and I feel like that way it added something that was genuinely missing to this show, that tension that put us on edge. And I know there should have been more, but what was done seemed to have people already eating it up. Also, I would like to give honorable mentions to both Bokura no by Eve and Curtain Call by Yuri for delivering one of the stronger anime openings for MHA. I still stream both of them on Spotify to this day, but seriously, like, no one was talking about MHA until season 7, which is a pretty big accomplishment in itself. Then anime onlys caught up and boom, all of a sudden we were excited for season 8 with an audience that was waiting for whatever the story would cook. With the stakes being raised so incredibly high, this would lead to the boom effect that would be. So in October of 2025, we begin season 8 with All Might nearing his deathbed, Bakugo still on his deathbed, and Deku fighting in this final struggle with Shigaraki. All hope seems lost, and I don't think this was a coincidence. The state of where we last left off this season was genius because it really put the people on edge. And immediately picking up where we last left off amped up the expectations of what would happen, with 8 back-to-back episodes of pure cinema. With Naomi Nakayama directing it, the season's visuals, impact, and voice acting all culminated into a cinematic showdown of Bakugo versus All For One and Deku versus Shigaraki. And this time, people were watching. That iconic dap-up Deku and Bakugo did to get to their respective fights sparked massive visibility alone. From this, viral social media hype began to emerge. And for the first time in years, people gave a shit. I'd seen a bunch of influencers that had made hating MHA their whole personality start to talk about it in a positive light. The ripple effect this moment had was crazy. This execution following the setup left in season 7, as well as the straight up just god tier animation going on here, forced jaded viewers to come back for the spectacle. And by all means, this was truly a masterpiece. The once fractured fanbase had come back together, as we saw Deku throw his last punch into All For One and end his reign of terror to the iconic Yusei Run soundtrack. This massive turnaround culminated in the episode of AFO's defeat getting rated a 9.9, something most anime can dream of. Well, that was before getting review bombed down to a 9.7 by a bunch of haters, because of course it did. Some of y'all really hate to see this show win, huh? But regardless of that, this was a pretty big moment for MHA. From being completely out of the conversation when people talked about the biggest anime, to suddenly making history, My Hero Academia pulled off what might be the greatest comeback of that year. The social perception around MHA had changed for the better, but a question still remains. Was it just because of bandwagon behavior and people being hyped at god tier animation? Or was it because the series did something fundamentally different? Well, to be quite frank with you, contrary to popular belief, the series was never the issue. While yes, the reception of the final season on social media did amplify the praise MHA got, the final season actually benefited from changing the way it paced and produced the adaptation of these later arcs compared to the earlier seasons. Recall that earlier we talked about how the story had a lot of pacing issues and butchered some of the better arcs like My Villain Academia because the editors messed up the timeline to make other, less meaningful arcs fit within one season. While the slow pacing that made season 5 incredibly frustrating to watch was completely eliminated in the final season. Instead, we got 11 episodes that got straight to the point with absolutely zero filler, leading to drastic improvements in pacing. Studio Bones only amplified this through high-budget voice acting and production, making the anime surpass the source material of the manga at times. I feel like they put so much life into it, and the manga panels were finally able to emotionally resonate with anime watchers, instead of feeling like a cross-reference to a coloring book. This culminated in mass praise being received because in the end, it was all in the portrayal of the story. And as a byproduct of this, many people finally started to overlook the toxicity of the fanbase, since the series concluded in the loudest and best way possible. The season was so good that the haters had no choice but to shut up and enjoy the ride. It's important to know that most of MHA's polarizing fans were young kids who grew up alongside the characters over this 10-year run. By that point, they had naturally outgrown that side of themselves, causing this toxic subculture of shipping wars to gradually quiet down and slowly fade into obscurity. Ultimately, this loud minority of fans just couldn't detract Studio Bones from cooking up a storm with MHA's incredible conclusion. If you can't beat him, join him. So was MHA ever actually as mid as people made it out to be? Honestly, no. In fact, nothing from the story has fundamentally changed in the adaptation. Because as Ocean has once said, people aren't fans of My Hero Academia, they are fans of discourse. And I really like this line because it shows that the hate directed towards the story wasn't really about the story itself. It was more so about the reputation of the fandom and the way later adaptation choices affected how people experienced the story. MHA was a smash hit in its earlier seasons, so it became a very easy target for contrarian hate. Then the fandom got embarrassing enough that people started treating the show like a joke by association, rejecting the show's brighter tones in the earlier half of the series in favor of darker shonens like Jujutsu Kaisen or Chainsaw Man that rose to popularity. And I think the shift in the last 3 seasons really helped vindicate how the show was perceived, as moving into a more darker vibe for MHA's standards is what really helped elevate it back to where people started taking it more seriously and give it the respect it had been missing. And season 8 just tied everything together so perfectly to give closure the fans absolutely needed. So people did switch up on MHA, but it wasn't because the show magically became something new. It was because people finally saw what MHA could look like when the adaptation, pacing, and presentation actually lined up with the scale of the story and manga. And as my favorite manga of all time, it did a damn good job for my first read. The series means so much to me, and I'm so glad I stuck to writing for this show even when it was hated. It was so nice to see people come together for this final moment so y'all could see it was never really that bad. This truly was Our Hero Academia. But that concludes our investigation into why everyone truly switched up on MHA. If you enjoyed this video and made it to the end, thank you. I hope to make more content on polarizing opinions in anime in general, so if you'd like to see me cover more of that, feel free to subscribe. But until next time, my friends, see you on the other side.